Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for coming back to another episode of Fireside Chats. Today's a very exciting episode because I am joined by one of my friends, Prateek Bhatnagar. Prateek is currently in India, but he's worked in Mountain View, and we'll talk about him a little bit. But before we get started, I want to introduce this Tech Hustlers Discord Fireside Chat as well. I'm Shruti Kapoor, I'm your host, and I'm excited to welcome you to another episode. In these fireside chats, we bring developers from the community where they share not only their successes, but also their career journeys, and also share a little bit of the struggles they faced along the way. When we talk to people or when we listen to their talks or when we like see them on LinkedIn, we see their success stories and we often think like people are doing amazing things and we kind of forget that they have also faced challenges. It's easy to kind of feel alone when we are facing challenges and feel like everybody else is doing great and maybe it's just me and feel like very very lonely. So, through these fireside chats, I bring inspirational people from the community who share their ups and downs and how they overcame and show you the real side of being a developer in the tech community. With that, I want to introduce my guest, Prateek Bhatnagar. Prateek is a software engineer, staff software engineer at Coinbase, and he's currently contributing his expertise remotely from India. Prateek also worked at Google at Mountain View, California as a senior software engineer. Prior to joining Coinbase, he also worked at Uber as a front end architect. But that's not all. Prateek also has a wealth of knowledge and contributes his time to open source projects such as NextJS and is a core team member of Preact. Overall, he's an amazing human being and a great friend of mine. And it is my pleasure to bring Prateek on the stage. Hello, Prateek.
Hey everyone. Hey Shruti. Thank you so much for having me.
How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I am enjoying the last bit of Sunday.
Oh, cool. Same here. Same here. Last few hours of the weekend,
Yeah, it's
right?
I came back from vacation as well, and we were just talking off stream that you came back from Kerala. It's I think the first day going back to work is really really hard.
Yes, it is. I mean, like I'm coming from a longer vacation, so I'm like a lot more recharged to go back in. But yes, like it's definitely hard.
I feel like the longer I take vacations, the more I feel like not going back to work.
Yes, somehow it has never been the case with me. Like I love going back to work till the time like I'm working on the things that excite me, and
Oh yeah.
really I am right now. But as that scene changes, I definitely feel those Monday blues.
So before we get started, why don't you take a minute to introduce yourself, Prateek?
Sure. So I guess you covered a lot of it already and very perfectly. But just to sum it up again, I'm Prateek. I work as a staff software engineer in Coinbase. By trade, I'm a front end engineer. But as of now, I do a lot of things which means impact for Coinbase. So I definitely am working, contributing, looking after the Coinbase apps, a bunch of infrastructure things. So I'm a part of infrastructure organization in Coinbase. I work with developer experience as being my direct team, and that has been kind of the theme for most of my career. As you said, like I worked with Google for developer tooling for quite a lot, and naturally, a lot of my open source contribution went into developer tooling, namely Preact CLI for most part of it, right? And for Google, also I work for Chrome, for AMP, and from Chrome side, I worked and contributed to Next.js. So developer tooling and developer experience has been like most of the highlight of my career.
That's really cool. Like I had no idea that you worked on developer tooling at Google. Tell me a little bit about like what that's like and what does developer tooling at Google include?
Right. So uh, a lot of my work has been around open source tooling from Google for developers. Now, one of my first projects was accelerated mobile pages. So
Oh.
this is a set of web components which back in the time developers could use, and this was the promise of the project was that your pages would load instantly,
Hmm.
right? With a bunch of privacy preserving preloading going on behind the scenes, but that was the North Star. That was one thing. So the output of my work has always been like the users of my work and my team's work were always other developers, right? One of the other things that I contributed to a bunch of things when I was at Google, and to everything that my bandwidth allowed me to. One of the other things were Workbox, which is a service worker framework or service worker
Oh,
library, helper utility library, I could say.
I see.
I know a lot of you know a lot of products like Tinder, a lot of other products like Twitter, if I'm not wrong, and a lot of surprisingly Indian government
Hmm.
websites use Workbox.
Oh.
And so, like, the fun part of this bit was that you build something which gets magnified by the sense that other developers use it, and then they produce the impact out in the world. So that
Hmm.
was quite fun. And then I guess one of the major projects that I have contributed to from Google side was working with Next.js and a bunch of features in Next.js back in the days.
Hmm. And you
Yeah,
are
so
also a contributor of NextJS. So is that how you got involved with the NextJS community?
that's somewhat the opposite of that is true. I got
Oh,
involved with a team which was doing Next.js, and I was like, I would love to do that. And some very kind people were open to let me into the team, and that's how I got into Next.js. I've definitely been working I was working very lightly with what Next.js was doing because I was doing Preact CLI, taking some inspiration, digging in their code. But my official journey with Next.js started with Chrome.
oh, wow,
Yeah, and
interesting.
I guess now the team is called as the Aurora team.
Aurora
They
team.
are, yes, the team is still there with even more brilliant folks, and they're still working with Next. They're working with Angular and more.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about like working at Google specifically. Like from outsiders' perspective, it looks like an amazing place to work. The culture seems great. What is it really like being an employee of Google? And before we get there, how do you even find a job at Google? How many lead code questions do you have to do?
Oh, so this is a thing which was very surprising to me. Google, like a lot of other folks, was also like a dream job for me as well, which I happened to stumble on right after putting down my papers. I was supposed to join elsewhere,
Oh,
and I found this job for user experience engineer at Google.
okay.
So
That's
Google
like front
has
end, right?
yeah, so Google has multiple front end roles. One is user experience engineer, and this was as per my last update. So one is user experience design, which is basically you go in as a front end engineer, but you basically work on prototypes on of project, but you don't do like production code. One is
Oh,
user experience engineer, uh, UXE for I don't remember what's the other term, but that's basically where you take those prototypes and code them for products. And there is somewhat a third stream which is called software engineers, but more front end focused.
okay.
So the one that I found was user experience engineers. These are engineers who are supposed to do like a lot of very core front end stuff and
Hmm.
not full stack stuff. So
Okay.
I did took a month's break to do like entire data structures and brush up and um, whatnot, like the regular
All the lead
FANG
code.
interviews process. But I was surprised to my core that there was only one round which was lightly touching the data structures,
Really?
right, for the user experience engineers, and that's where I came to know about this. So the user experience engineering stream, that's those are the interviews which does not drill you very deeply
Okay.
in data structures. Every other stream still does,
Okay.
because that's the common part that they do.
Right.
Yeah, but once you get into it, right, it depending on where you are coming from. Oh, okay. depending on where you're coming from, you can have like variety of experiences. Google is definitely uh, one of the great employers out there, even now, right?
Hmm.
I love the fact that one of their it's I don't think I've seen this written anywhere, but definitely I feel one of their retention policies is like how much can you pamper your employees and
Hmm.
providing them the best environment to work in,
Hmm.
so that they can work longer, right? And attrition is not a problem, retention is not a problem, and
Hmm.
they can also work healthy, right? It's not like
Hmm.
everyone somehow they understand that life is not just about work. There are times when you really, get down and ship things, but for the most part, people do understand here,
Hmm.
right? But coming from a startup uh, background, I had a bit of an experience myself. So I was coming from Flipkart, where being an engineer means like shipping products,
Right.
building, having impact. So we were shipping code. There were like lakhs of people touching my code, touching the pages that we were doing,
Right.
touching the pages that we were building. We were doing like first big billion day, or I guess it can translate back to Prime Day or Black
Yeah.
Friday kind of stuff
Flipkart
for
is
India for the
like
first time.
For those who don't know, Flipkart is like India's Amazon version, right?
Yes, yes. So it was like the biggest e-commerce player back then. But coming to Google, it was more about how can we build sustainable, longer living code bases, right? Where
Hmm.
uh, code health and other things does really matter. So when it when I came to Google, it was a big culture shock for me that we were shipping things much more slowly,
Hmm.
right? And there was a lot more focus on process. I definitely struggled a lot around this part, where
Yeah.
for me, things like if you, I definitely, I specifically remember this example where I was asked to do an A/B experiment and
Uh-huh.
like give estimates, and a startup engineer inside me like just went there and said like, okay, I can do this entire thing in like 3 weeks or so, and I guess I ended up taking 3.5 months for the same
Oh,
thing,
wow.
because it's not about like, hey, you go and
Right.
code something and just ship it, right? There had to be like TDDs, which is like technical design documents,
Ah.
right? Which till this date I've never written in my professional journey, right? Till that particular time.
Right. Right.
So I had to learn how to do a design document. Then learned that there are deployment teams across time zones, which means like it pushes, if I miss a single thing in my commit, now the deployment is pushed by another 3 days,
Oh.
right? And like just the sheer size of moving pieces in that,
Yeah.
on that scale, and on a scale of Google where there are multiple teams to ship this thing, uh, was just culturally very different for me.
Hmm.
That's where I started struggling with my career in very early days with Google, where
Hmm.
I'm like, I definitely know how to code, right?
Yeah.
And I've been a decently well performing engineer in my past. So, like, what's the gap here? So,
Yeah.
uh, it basically started making sense that you're not basically just here to ship code, right? You're here to make, establish a code base which can live well beyond your own tenure in a particular team or in a particular company,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Which basically means processes, which basically means documents, uh, diagrams, which since high school I don't think I ever did till that day,
What
right?
kind of
Uh,
diagrams?
so imagine this, like the first design document that I ended up doing it was basically had, hey, a statement of problem that we want to do an XYZ A/B experiment, right? I wrote this is the control branch, this is the experiment branch, and these are the expected results, and just sent it out, which was like, I guess, 3/4 of the page, and I had around uh, somewhere around 40 to 50 comments
Oh,
on that
wow. From
on that
people.
doc from people because they had zero context of what this project was, and this
Right.
document was among the entire team, even to my skip level managers and the teams which was not a part of directly my working group, but also other things, but which we were going to touch as a part of this experiment, right? So
Hmm.
they had a lot of questions. Nobody knew like what I was talking about. I used abbreviations and things
Hmm.
which only the two or three people who were working on it understood,
Hmm.
right? So I kind of started realizing that hey, if I don't explain everything, I answered a bunch of those questions, and they came back with cross questions, or other people came
Uh,
back with same questions. So started making sense that hey, bro, you need to explain what you're doing. You need to give enough context of background. Where is
hmm.
this problem coming from, and what are the pieces? Even if you're using abbreviations, you need to give some kind of glossary. And
Yeah.
like one thing that I learned the hard way is like graphical representations of system design is much more easier to grasp than anything else, than a wall of
Hmm.
text, right?
Right.
So that's where I'm like, okay, I need to just put everything here and not
Hmm.
assume that people just know this stuff.
Yeah.
And that's where also it took another month or so. A lot, I guess, a lot of time. My teammates and the people I reported to were really frustrated from the fact that hey, we have asked this person to just lay this down. Why are we getting this short-handed information or incomplete documents?
Hmm.
So there was a that was the cultural adjustment I had to do into a company like Google or Uber or even Coinbase,
Hmm.
which are trying to not just ship the code.
Yeah.
So if you are like going 0 to 1 in your product, for which was the state of Flipkart when I was there, it's hands on keyboard and
Yeah.
find a product market fit and ship the right product, probably kill competition. But
Yeah.
when you're scaling from 1 to 0, that's a different story,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, that's very interesting. So like part of your job is not just shipping code, but also bringing the entire team along and kind of like imparting that knowledge as you go, so that even if you
Right.
leave the company, there's like other people who know what you were doing.
Yes, right. And also, this is like you're not just working. A lot of times, when you are one thing which is specifically different in infrastructure organizations is that they don't have product managers, or they don't have a lot of
Hmm.
product managers. They definitely do, but they are much more scarce than product teams,
Right.
right? So like you need to convey to your stakeholders why you're doing what you're doing. You need to these are things where either companies or outside companies, other developers would come and work. So everything needs to be very, very solid. Like the documentation
Hmm.
really needs to be solid. You can't just, hey,
Right.
I made a change to the add to cart button and now it's working faster. Things doesn't
Yeah.
work like that, which
Right.
was which was in in the job that I worked prior to this, prior
Hmm.
to any of these jobs,
It's
right? So
interesting that you did that as part of like senior software engineer role at Google, and this is something that you do as you become more and more senior as well into staff and staff plus role, senior and senior staff. And I think now you're working as a staff engineer at Coinbase,
right,
correct?
yes.
So,
So there's a bit correction there. When I joined Google, this was like a software engineer, and somewhere in between, I kind of got hold of things and
hmm,
got promoted as to senior software engineer.
okay, okay, got
Yeah.
it. So, okay, so you started as software, got promoted to senior software, now working as
Yes.
staff engineer.
Right.
Okay, cool. I think that's a really good point to like ask this question, which is like, as somebody who's starting out in their career, or like maybe is in that senior category, or is thinking of getting promoted to a staff engineer, what are some like key skills somebody should have to get promoted in a company as big as Google, or maybe even Uber, or Coinbase?
I feel like there's definitely a sweet point for every company, right? Knowing what this company desires from a senior engineer versus a staff engineer, knowing that
Yeah.
prior hand is very essential, and probably everyone should be working with their managers to just explicitly ask, right?
Hmm.
What does it mean to be a senior engineer in Google or in Uber or Coinbase? Few common things that I have seen between every matured company is that we want software engineers to be people who work independently,
Hmm.
right? If they are given a problem, they should be able to ship high quality code. Senior engineers are where basically they have impact on, if given a fuzzy problem, they can break down the problem for their other teammates. They can give better estimates for a longer running task,
Hmm.
right? Break those tasks, do stakeholder communication, and take a bunch of their team along with themselves to solve like a fuzzy problem.
Hmm.
What I felt and what have worked for me being a staff engineer is basically finding the problem. Like
Hmm.
uh, a lot of my engineering up till senior engineer was basically what is the problem and how can I solve it, right? Starting with like last 2 years, that has changed very dramatically, and now a lot of my work is what's the problem that's hampering the business, right?
Hmm.
And it's a lot less about how can we solve it, because I have a pool of great engineers that I can work with to fix the how part. But
Hmm.
like what exactly is the problem, right?
Hmm.
Translating it into engineering terms is one of the things that's like one of the core part of my job as a staff software engineer, finding the problems rather than just solving it, like
Hmm.
expanding myself into like what is the thing that's causing problem. Like for example, there can be use. I was talking to this brilliant engineer in React Nexus, which is a conference that happened over the weekend, and they were like, we were having a lot of user retention problem, and the
Hmm.
way that basically they ended up solving it is by creating a performance observability library. So now they can, yeah, measure what's broken
I
and ship
see.
code to fix it, and then hence they ended up fixing the user retention problem. So it's like you find the problems as a staff
Hmm.
engineer, like what's causing your business to have a setback, right? And translating them into like, hey, okay, this means I have to either build a library or I have to build a design system. That becomes a part of your job.
Okay, so
Yeah.
coming from senior to staff, I guess what you said is the most important thing is not just solving the problem, which is a senior and a
Right.
software engineer's expectation, but also being aware enough to know that this problem
Right.
exists and working with your
Yeah.
team to find a solution for that problem.
Right. Yeah. That
Hmm.
that definitely sums it up. I guess every level demands you to like zoom out further
Hmm.
and see the bigger picture. It's one of the tougher, what do you call it? Tougher talents to have as an engineer. It's very, because the education of an engineer a lot of times is very focused about how you code.
Right.
Right. So
Yeah.
then as you get into a job and as you progress into your career, you need to like flip the whole story and like start finding problems, which is none of our conventional education.
Yeah. We don't
Right.
want to find problems, we just want to fix them.
Yeah. Like give me a keyboard. I'm like a happy person.
Exactly. And
Right.
you've also contributed to Next.js as well, and you are a core team member of Preact. So you have these
Mhm.
open source contributions outside of your work as well. So about that, I want to ask first thing, like, how do you find these opportunities to contribute to open source libraries? And second is, if somebody is interested, how can they get started?
There are few ways. I chose the most easiest one. There are more tougher ones and probably more worthy ones. But the way I did this is I used to build like a lot of side projects. I
Hmm.
used to build like silly games. I used to build just utility things which I could use for myself, and I ended up finding bunch of problems. In the first one that I ever contributed to was Preact router, just
Hmm.
because there was no out of the box way of doing lazy loading in that particular routing. So I had to use like something more complicated like React router, which I didn't want to.
Hmm.
uh, so I started contributing to that. And once I did this very silly, very easy contribution, I gained enough confidence to get onto something more complex.
Hmm.
right? And that's where I started doing. Next up, I built this Preact material components library, which was just a wrapper over Google's material components. And
Hmm.
then from there, I started looking into Preact's code, Preact CLI code, which still felt like just go to the step which feels easier to you. And looking back now, like talking to you, I can look back and tell that I've definitely tackled some tougher bits in
Hmm.
Preact CLI, Next.js and stuff. But it was always up till it was my open source contribution on my own time. I just kind of looked at the problems and solved the next one, which I could, really
Hmm.
think that I can do it.
Right.
There are definitely the other way that I've seen a lot of engineers doing this is they're looking for better work, right?
Hmm.
If they're not super satisfied with the work and their day job,
Right.
and then they find with the problem statement or the issues, you can go to
GitHub
the
issues.
the GitHub repository of whatever excites you. It can be React, it can be Svelte, it can be anything else, right? And you can find the problems. Most of these repositories have labels as good starter bugs,
Right.
and once you fix a bunch of them, now you can start looking at what problems actually excite you,
Hmm.
read that issue if there's a discussion on top of it, and probably just take a jab. They may or may not reject your PR, but a lot of these open source, it's not really expectation, but a lot of open source maintainers are kind enough to just tell you why are they rejecting your PR, and you
Hmm.
can potentially work from there,
Hmm. So,
right?
working at a big company and contributing to these open source projects, how do you find the time to balance both of them and still have a family as well?
Yes, that's definitely a tricky bit. This might come across as funny, but the thing that really, really, really helped was the Bay Area traffic. Uh, I used to commute in Google's buses, and I had like around 1.5 hour of commute every day. So that was my open source
Did you
time.
live in
But
San Francisco and commute down to Mountain View?
no, I used to live in San Jose, and I used to commute to Mount View.
Okay.
So it's
Wow.
like 45 minutes both
Gotcha.
sides. Yeah. But there are other better ways to do this, right? I still have a slice in my calendar where I take up most of the time. I take up just documentation now because a lot of code work needs a lot more time.
Hmm.
But um, I have also done 2 hour slice on Friday evenings with my manager
Oh,
as an understanding, and they were kind enough. If that's something that your employer can provide, make
yeah.
use of it. I have had dedicated time in my calendar when I was single, so that was easier. But with family, it's basically what I do now is to find a time slot where either I'll have a meeting if that's required, but most of the days, like I won't say most, but some of the days it's not the case that I need to
Hmm.
be in a meeting or someplace. So that's where I swap that
Hmm.
time. Right.
I see.
But yes,
So,
that's definitely a bit more of 100, and it's beyond 100% of your work,
hmm.
right?
So
So
what
you
I'm
need to.
hearing is like putting dedicated time slots in your calendar, having it on your calendar helps a lot in making time for it.
Yes, and put a time slot which makes sense for you.
Right.
For me, it's either meetings across time zones, and if they're not happening, then it's open source time.
Okay.
Or if there are days which you are mostly not super busy with, for example, there have been time in my career when Friday evenings have been that case. So I
Hmm.
used to put that back to open source,
Hmm.
right? Yeah,
And
and
you meant
hopefully you're not stuck in Bay Area traffic.
or somebody actually said like in Bangalore traffic now.
Oh, yeah, like Bangalore traffic. I don't know. So if you public transport in Bangalore is not that great. So yeah.
So another tip you mentioned was like talking to your manager and working with them to like set up like 2 hours in your calendar if you have like that sort of relationship. I think that's
Right.
really good advice as well, especially for people who've been like who are the senior software engineer and probably have a really good relationship with their manager and kind of know what they want to work on.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. Somehow, if you can tie that back on how that can bring back impact to your product, your organization, or your company,
Yeah.
it makes it such a simple sell because hey, I'm
Yeah.
gonna try invest my time into, let's say, if your current project is React, and yeah, I'll see how Svelte works, right? And if you can come back and say like, hey, I've tried this, and probably we can save XX percent of time of loading, painting, or whatever, then it
Yeah.
just makes everything so simple.
Yeah, that's a really good tip because for you're making the manager's job easy to give you that time if you're bringing back that
Right.
knowledge to the team.
Yes.
Yeah. I think there's a question here from Divyansh, which is I don't know if you already touched on this, but I'll ask this question anyway. I have a question. I've not joined any college yet. So, as we know, that getting internship in first year is not a cup of tea. So, how can I contribute to open source so I can get in GSOC? I'm not sure what that is. I know full stack dev.
Okay, great. So GSOC is Google Summer of Code, where a
Oh,
bunch of open source projects comes in and acts like mentors. So they get interns, or basically they get people who would love to work on open source projects or their projects, right? And it's a whole process. When I did GSOC, this was back in, like, this has been like at least a decade back, so I won't comment on the exact process of it, but getting internship in your first year, uh, you can definitely do is pick one project, pick one open source project, and start contributing to it. Like, I guess consistency is the key here. And
hmm,
if you have made enough substantial contributions to that particular project by the time you are free for your internship, it would be easy for that particular open source project. And if they are in GSOC, it will be easy to make that case. And
hmm,
GSOC is not really a hard requirement here. A lot of open source projects are now, have sponsors or have open collective, so they can get you as a direct intern.
hmm.
GSOC, I'm sure, has a much more complex process to get into, so I'm not the expert there.
Hmm. Gotcha.
Yeah.
And there's a question from Gaurav on how do you guys plan for quarter or sprint planning? Do you also face capacity crunches? I think this might be related to Google, but I guess also applies to Coinbase as well.
Right. So Coinbase is definitely, like, we are experimenting with something, so I won't really comment on that one. Uh, Google is big enough that every team does this as per their wish.
Hmm.
We used to definitely, we were a lot more R&D focused team. So we still used to do 2 weeks of sprint and quarter planning. Uh, we definitely did, like, capacity crunches are inevitable uh,
Hmm.
because of personal commitments, vacations, and stuff.
Yeah.
So the way that we used to do OKR planning, I guess this boils down to OKR planning, is that have one north star of where this team what this team wants to achieve. One or two is more than enough. List your P zeros, and I say, like, just have P1s and then stretch goals. Don't do more than that. Whatever the team thinks that cannot be done is basically a stretch goal. The other
Hmm.
good thing that Google recognizes pretty well is that you don't have to score a one on your OKR. If all your OKRs are one, basically it means that you are less ambitious,
Yeah.
right? So the sweet spot is zero point 0.7, right?
Oh.
That's the expectation, that if you are landing at zero point 0.7, that's the right spot. If you're like scoring one on all, then basically you're just not aiming high enough,
Oh.
right?
Hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah.
that's how we used to do it.
Hmm. Very cool. Okay, now that we're at the end of this podcast, this not podcast, what is this live stream?
Okay.
I want to ask you, Prateek, how where can people find you?
Oh, so I am active on most of the platforms. It's just a lot of combinations of Prateek BH. So either the underscore comes in the beginning, which is Twitter underscore Prateek BH, or Instagram is also underscore Prateek BH. Yeah,
Okay.
I guess those two platforms should be a good starting point to get the conversations rolling.
Okay, I'm gonna post your Twitter
Sure,
here. Find Prateek on Twitter. My typing is not as fast here.
that's okay.
Give me 1 second. Okay, cool. All right, so this brings us to the end of this live stream. But the fun doesn't stop here because now we're going to jump into Discord and we're going to talk about a goal that we've been working on over the last 30 days and what we want to work on in the next 30 days. So, Pratik, do you have a goal for us that you've been working on over the last 30 days?
Yes. So I've been working on reducing or improving Coinbase's performance, uh,
Oh,
cold boot, and somehow I was able to just pull it off in the last moment.
nice.
Right.
And what are you working on in the next 30 days?
Um, Next 30 days is basically about bringing resiliency to developer experience in Coinbase. It's not, I try to do at least 60 days
Hmm,
because I get pulled into conversations and projects a lot of times. So I
right.
do aims at 45 minimum or 60 days as a
Makes
healthy thing,
sense.
right? Also because I have to partner with a bunch of engineers to get one of those goals
Oh,
done,
yeah. Right.
right? So there are a lot of moving variables.
You depend on
So
somebody else.
yes, so my next 60 days of goal is to bringing resiliency on how engineers test their code in Coinbase.
Awesome. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
This was the end of the stream. Pratik, we'll see you in Discord, yes?
cool. Yes.
All right. Thank you so much,
All
folks,
right.
for joining.
Thank you.
And if you want to chat with Pratik more, or if you have a goal that you've been working on, come and join us in Discord. But otherwise, I'll see you in another month with another guest. Bye.
See ya.